What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that devotes itself to leadership. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the Brexit party. That is, if there's still a party. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the latest figures in retail sales to the current British exports to New South Wales, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Claire Dimpfl, the owner and head of Tadpoles Nursery School in Chelsea. The school was started by Claire, Mrs. Dimpfl, to her pupils in 1976, and in 1993 moved to their current location and became Tadpoles. Their premises include a garden, a large classroom, 3 smaller classrooms, outside classrooms, playground, and an indoor heated swimming pool. The nursery emphasises a play-based approach to engage with the children, and I discuss this and more with Claire now. Claire, welcome.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for being with us today. Now, it's been a fair few months since the nursery has been in the review. I'm sure listeners would love to know how everything is going there and if there are any developments.
Within the nursery, well, it was the nursery, the article in the Parliamentary Review was really well received by my parents and about my prospective parents as well. They loved it. And with the nursery itself seems to be going very well. So far, we are in a very international area in Kensington, Chelsea. Obviously, we have a lot of parents from other countries, a lot of European parents, and so far we have been lucky that Brexit hasn't had too much an effect on my parents and on my waiting list and my list for the next school. And in fact, I've noticed actually quite a lot of new families appearing actually in London, which is interesting.
Oh, very reassuring. Well, and you'll have plenty of experience to compare it to, Claire. The nursery, for those that don't know, has been going now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but for 43 years, if that's right.
Yes, and in a different format. We've been in these premises since 1993, but I have actually run a nursery since 1976.
Fantastic. Now, so much has changed in the sector over those years. It'd be hard to go over all of those things, but perhaps what might be more pertinent is what have you found to be key in that time in engaging with children, and how that helped shape today's nursery's philosophy?
Well, I feel very much that I've changed my philosophy over the years. When we first started, it was much more for us, being in central London, sitting down with children and trying to make them do their letters and numbers. And over the years, I have really felt that I've begun to feel that actually play is what they should be doing. We have far too much emphasis on formal education too early, and the children really, really need to play and to learn to explore for themselves. And we've really adapted our practice to that over a number of years. And we have to follow the early years foundation stage as set out by Ofsted, but within that we can be fairly flexible and fairly creative, which is lovely. It doesn't always there are bits of it that, particularly the new one coming out, which the consultations out, which I don't quite understand what they're doing, and that needs a bit of unscrambling. But over the past 30 years, there has been a definite change in education. I think parents, funny enough, as I've become kind of less ambitious for the early years, sort of reading, writing, sitting down, I think parents become very stressed and feel that is what education's about. So I have to do a lot of unraveling that for them, and we do quite a lot of workshops for parents to try and explain our philosophy and how things work.
I think that's exceptionally important, isn't it, to make sure that the parents understand and are on board with what is it you're doing every day. And I know that you employ at the nursery it's a theory called PACE, which I think stands. Yes, it's playfulness, acceptance. You'll have to help me out here, Claire.
Curiosity and empathy.
That's it. Now, could you talk us through that and how that relates from a theory to actually the children themselves?
Well, I think that this philosophy comes from Dan Hughes, who's an American psychologist who's written many books, including one called Brainbased Parenting. And playfulness is very important with children because you need to have a truly playful attitude towards children. Children are really, they understand if you're not really being playful, if you're pretending to be playful. So kind of, to me, we have to keep an element of the child inside us. We have to enjoy the play with them and understand what it is achieving. Acceptance, we have to accept that children need to be individuals, that there are some things that children can do and some things that can't, and we have to try and celebrate those that they do and accept that there are some things that really need to be helped, and each child is individual. And curiosity, I mean, curiosity for life, curiosity for learning, that's, well, you know, curiosity to how you solve a problem, that is actually incredibly important to develop this curiosity about the world around them, in the children. And my staff need to show curiosity for what's happening too, which they do. They're really good at sort of developing the child and asking them what they're doing and being really curious about what goes on in their little life. And of course, empathy is incredibly important. Empathy, not sympathy, but empathy, really understanding where a child's coming from. Really also understanding that what's very important to us, which gets missed out a lot, is that children are always asked to be happy. Oh, you have to do da-da-da-da. We need to be empathetic to the fact that they have emotions like us. They can feel angry, they can feel sad, they can feel happy, they can feel frightened, and we need to allow them to have those feelings and have empathy when they do. And also say to them things like, I'm feeling sad today, or I'm feeling angry today myself, I'm not having a good day, because I think that really helps them to understand the value of all emotions.
And I know that beyond that, of course, it being in central London can sometimes mean that it's very, very urban. Sometimes adults find that environment a little bit intense, let alone children. And I know that you also do a lot of work in making sure that they have time outside and indeed their own vegetable patch, if that's right.
Well, we are very lucky. We have an amazing garden space. Well, it was a garden space when we first came here. That's all it was. And over the years, we've developed it into a really lovely garden, which is totally ecologically sound. So the children plant all their own vegetables and fruit, soft fruit. We have fruit trees as well. We have a pond for pond dipping. Very careful rules on that and how they do that, so we don't have any falling ins. And it's safely fenced. We make our own compost, so at break times we have fruit and vegetables, and we use the leavings of that to help with the compost. We also we have rabbits and things, so we use their droppings to go in the compost, and so we make our own compost. We don't use any form of chemicals, so it's very, very much a hands-on experience for the children of learning to grow. We kind of call it farm to fork, but it's not That's not really a farm. It's that sort of idea. And we're very lucky because we've just won which I'm going to collect the prize tonight, the Ecology Award for Gardens for Kensington and Chelsea.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations, Claire. It's well deserved. And perhaps actually looking more broadly at the sector, I know that there are a lot of challenges at the moment, but I think perhaps it would be remiss if we didn't talk about it. When it comes to so-called universal funding, 15 hours free childcare, however it's very attractive to parents, of course, but how is it affecting nurseries, especially on the smaller scale?
For nurseries, it isn't really adding up financially. The problem is that we are not given enough money. In this particular area, we are given about $6.50 an hour, which we have to pay. And remember, this is London. We have to pay a large rent for this premises. I mean, a really seriously large rent. And of course, I have very well qualified teachers. I have 21 very well qualified teachers, and we are a large setting, so we need all those teachers, and they need to be well paid. The trouble is that the pay in the childcare sector isn't wonderful, and people leave it a lot because of that, because they cannot afford to live. And so we need to make sure that my staff are happy, and that they are, and a happy staff means that they're looking after the children well. We are, it is fairly desperate that this money is not enough. And for us, we don't charge top-up fees, but we do have a lot of extras which we can charge for. But to me, it makes us all liars. That sounds awful, but if the government would change the word free to subsidised,
absolutely,
it would be such a help to us, because that's what it is really. It's a subsidy. And the parents don't really see that. And when they come to us and they say, oh, but and I say, well, we are giving you so many extra things. And I do have a few children who I absolutely give free places to if I feel that, financially there's a struggle anyway. I've always done that. But I can't run a school. I could not run a school just on the amount of money that comes from the government. And I think so many people are saying that too.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think what needs to be made clear for both your sake and parents' sake, that the Department of Education does need to make their calculations and everything much clearer. Because I think if they did that, I know it's something the Information Commission is looking at, people and parents especially will be able to see how little there is in terms of that funding. And I know that Neil Leach, the Chief Exec of the Early Years Alliance, he's just this week has put out the figures of just how many nurseries, preschools across the country are being forced to shut because of this.
Yeah. And it is incredibly, I mean, you have it's also very difficult to explain to parents, because you have a 15 hours universal, then the next 15 hours is means tested. So that makes a whole huge difference. That is difficult in itself to explain to parents. And we are also, when we do put out our fees to parents, we are not allowed to mention the amount of funding they're getting. So it does look a very weird bill when it says funding 0,000, and then they just get an amount at the bottom of the extra things, and parents get in a complete confusion about that. But we've been told we can't put out that information, so it is making us. It is very hard for us to. And we don't have a large admin team because we'd rather spend the money on the teaching.
Now, I'll put you on the spot in that case, Claire. If you are you're Secretary of State for the afternoon, you've got a magic wand, you get to pass whatever reforms you'd like. What is it you would do? What is it you think government could do best of all right now to help at the sector?
Well, I think they could actually double the money. I mean, you wouldn't, as I always say to my parents, you wouldn't pay a babysitter £6.50 an hour, would you? So, I mean, £12 an hour would be actually more realistic. So, I mean, I'm saying I know the Secretary of State doesn't have all the money in the world, but if they did, also with the means tested I don't feel it's been very well put together, because two parents can earn between them £99,000 and £99, £99,000 and 99 a year, so that comes up to about 200,000. But if one parent is earning 110,000 and the other is earning 20,000, they don't get the funding.
Extraordinary.
So it is a very. I don't know how it's been devised this way, but it doesn't kind of make sense to me that it's been devised that way. And as it is complicated. It should be made much simpler for parents, as well as and more realistic for us. I want to help parents, but I can't, because in this sector we ought to at least get as much funding as the state sector gets in the private sector.
Quite right, and I know that we speak in the midst of a general election campaign, which is so that'll ruin everybody's Christmas. But it might mean that in the very soon manifestos will be released, and it does appear both. Even the Conservative Party, I should say, look like they are going to be spending more than they usually do, and I think we'll be looking at that with keen interest to see how much of that is directed towards early years.
Absolutely. I have noticed both of them appear to be putting it quite heavily into their manifesto, but as usual skewed quite rightly in a way towards the parents, not thinking really about the actual early years sector at present.
You've already mentioned it, and since we brought politics up, and you have already said Brexit, was the question I think we could perhaps ask again, being in that urban central London setting, are you surprised or not perhaps at the effect on families, especially from Europe, coming and living in the area?
I think that some of them, I am surprised. I mean, there's so many of coming in, not necessarily, funny enough, from Europe. The newest sort of parent we've got a lot of children from South American countries. Canada, we've got quite a few coming in from America, and some coming in from the East, from Dubai and places like that. I get a lot of interest also from the Chinese children and Chinese parents. We are retaining our European families, and many of them, in fact, have applied for settled status. And I've been rather involved in writing letters saying that their children have been with us, etc., to help their settled status over the last few months.
Well, that's fantastically reassuring, in fact. And looking towards, and I'm conscious of the time here, actually, but looking at the future of childcare specifically, how do you see the next 5-10 years evolving?
I think there will be, I don't run a day nursery, I think there will be more emphasis on day nursery and for those who work, for parents who work. I slightly wish there wasn't this focus on getting parents back to work, so that the parent who is at home feels that they're slightly guilty about not going to work, because some parents really don't want to work. I think that there will be more emphasis, so that day nurseries will be the sort of way forward, and longer hours and more emphasis. Hopefully they will continue to emphasize play. For me, the most important thing is we're doing something at the moment called Think Equal, which is a global. We've just taken part in that. We're one of the pilot schools in England doing this, which is all to do with against violence, teaching children more to think equally, so to sort of cut out discrimination and violence and those sort of things. It comes from Leslie Adwin set this up after that brutal gang rape in a bus of a girl in New Delhi. And it is amazing, and I think this is the way forward. We need to be teaching our children about those sort of things, equality, and as I say, about recognizing all emotions. And I think the other thing, it's incredibly important. I know that Extinction Rebellion has been doing an amazing job, but we need to be looking at these children now. We need to be teaching them about the environment, about how to look after their environment, and what is going on in the environment.
Very much an all-encompassing sort of moral framework.
I think it's very important. I think this is where we can, our young people of today, that's what we can do. 0 to 5, they learn more than they're ever going to learn. They absorb more. And it's very, very important we get them young and discuss with them and let them know that the ecology, this world is very, very important. And they're the generation who will be able to save it.
Well, I think perhaps on that very positive note to end, Claire, congratulations again and good luck at the acceptance of the awards ceremony this evening.
Thank you.
And I hope we can see you again before long, Claire.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you for joining.
Okay, bye.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Claire, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Tadpoles are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags for you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that, no. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something, and it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Control Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December. Something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshirean, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Plunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner-city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Bunk was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the on the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, your step down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech that we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet. This is something like that goes in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old males cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, you know, it's like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death counts. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And the hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy because the former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you were quite unscathed from it.
He was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time. Yeah. But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm Otter St. Stephen's Tavern to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.